we're going to post this with our other Date with the Author videos on our Greenwich Library YouTube channel.
Great.
Okay, all right. Okay, so hello everyone and Happy New Year. I'm Michelle Martin, the Peterson Business Librarian at Greenwich Library, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to Date with an Author with author Lindsey Pollack on her new book, Recalculating. Navigate your career through the changing world of work. We have copies of Lindsey's book to give away. So if you follow the library on Instagram, you can enter to receive one of 5 copies. Or if you're not on Instagram, you can email me to receive one of another 5 copies. And I put my email address in the chat. So the first 5 respondees to my email will receive a copy of Recalculating. Lindsey will be in conversation with Nancy Collamer to discuss her book as well as current trends in the job market. Nancy Collamer is a retirement coach and author of Second Act Career, 50+ ways to profit from your passions during semi-retirement. Nancy also writes about careers for PBS website nextavenue.org. Lindsey Pollack is a New York Times best-selling author and one of the world's leading career and workplace experts. Lindsey's other books include The Remix, How to Lead and Succeed in a Multi-Generational Workplace, Becoming the Boss, New Rules for the Next Generation of Leaders, and Getting from College to Career, Your Essential Guide to Succeeding in the Real World. There will be time after to take your questions. Please type them in the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. And this program will be recorded and available on the library's YouTube channel. So welcome, ladies. I'm going to sign off and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. And you left off the most important part of my bio, which is a longtime former resident of Greenwich. So it's wonderful to be back in Greenwich, at least for the coming hour. And hi, Lindsey. I was going through my notes and I realized that when I interviewed you about the book, it was just about this time last year. And we were so hopeful. It was right when the vaccines were being rolled out. And we really thought the pandemic would soon be behind us. And here we are a year later. So the book was relevant then, and arguably it is even more relevant now. So I thought we should just dive right in. And why don't you share a little bit about the backstory as to why you wrote the book and explain the title, because it's a great story.
You got it. And I want to compliment you, Nancy, on dressing to match the book. So thank you for coordinating with my book cover. Noted and appreciated. First, thank you to Michelle and the Greenwich Library. I am a native of Norwalk, Connecticut. I live in New York City now, but Norwalk born and bred. So I've spent a lot of time on I-95 between the two places. And Nancy is a longtime friend and supporter and such a wonderful advocate. So the book, as you heard, I've written 3 previous books, and my book prior to this, The Remix, came out in 2019. So in early 2020, I was heavy into the promotion of that book. I'm an entrepreneur. This is what I do for a living. And my primary business is the speeches and workshops that I give. And I had a fully booked, really exciting calendar at the beginning of 2020 to promote The Remix, all about multi-generational workplaces. And in about a 2-week period, at the beginning of March, as we all know so well, my calendar went from fully booked to completely empty. And that is not any sort of exaggeration. And I was scared. That was my business. I'm the breadwinner in my family. And I was sitting in my apartment in New York City on the Upper West Side, truly staring out the window. And I saw cars on the street. And I just had this moment of feeling like when you're driving, and we've all had this, and you make a wrong turn or you hit some traffic and your GPS sort of glitches for a minute and says, recalculating. And I just looked at these cars and thought, it is like the entire world at the same time. We're all sitting in our cars and the GPS said, nope, you can't go the way you were going anymore. You have to do some recalculating. And at the same time, it was terrifying. I actually felt this sort of calming optimism, which was, okay, I can't go the way I was going as a speaker promoting the remix, but there are other ways to go, because your GPS never says, sorry, Nancy, too bad, unless you were on I-95 in Washington, D.C. the other day. So those people, I guess, probably got that message. But for the most part, there's usually another way. And the second reason I felt really optimistic is your GPS also never says, you have to go back to your driveway and start from the beginning. Whatever you've done to that point is sort of incorporated in the directions that you're given. And I have to be honest, I'm usually terrible at naming books. The title comes as the last step in the process, but I just thought this is a book, frankly, because if you look at the titles and the timing of my other books, I've always found that I like to write the books I wish I had when I was at a certain life stage. That was certainly my first book, Getting from College to Career. And I thought, oh boy, do I wish I had a book right now on how to recalculate in tough times. And I immediately started writing it. The book came out in March 2021. My first draft kept talking about, now that the pandemic is over, now in our post-pandemic world, and as you said, I didn't know how relevant it would be for so long, but the entire goal of the book, whether you're in the middle of a pandemic or just wanting to make a change, is how do you recalculate when the direction you're going in is no longer available to you?
Yeah. And, Lindsey, I've always said to you, one of the things I really appreciate about your books, and I've recommended, particularly Getting from College to Career to so many young people in my life, is that they are practical, and there's a bit of hard love. And yet they are always, they have an uplifting message. And so in this book, you lay out what you call 5 rules of the road. And I'd like you to talk about each one of them, because I think each one of them is just so critical. So the first one is, you say to embrace creativity. What do you mean by that?
So every road needs rules, and creativity, this one is really in response to a comment I hear a lot from job seekers. And I know we're going to talk about the Great Resignation, which is top of mind for everyone. I've always had a lot of people come up to me and say, I read your book, I've applied for 100 jobs, 200 jobs, 300 jobs, and nothing's happening. And my answer is, well, if you've applied for those jobs and nothing's happening, why don't you try something different? If you keep doing what you're doing and you're not getting the response that you want, it was an Einstein who said, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten, right? It's not smart to keep trying the same thing over and over. And so rule number 1, embrace creativity, is I think the first lesson of COVID, and I'll use my own story as an example. If I had decided, well, I'm a public speaker, I speak in person to audiences, I would be out of business right now, because that was not going to be possible in this new reality. And so I had to get creative and frankly brainstorm and say, what else could I do with my skills and my experience, my clients? So for example, obviously I had to learn how to present on Zoom and give virtual presentations. I started doing some more coaching and consulting, which I hadn't done a lot of, because that was possible in COVID. I started writing the new book. I started working on a podcast. So it's thinking about the skills you have, the desires you have, the connections you have, and applying them in different ways. And I think a really simple way to do this is to literally brainstorm, write down ideas. What is it that you could do? What have you always thought about doing, whether it's starting a business or looking for jobs? I think a lot of people are much more narrow than they realize in what they see as opportunities, when really there's so much that's possible. Not all of it is perfect, but you have to start thinking differently about what you might be able to do.
Yeah, it's such great advice. And I think one of the things I love about your book is that it's oriented towards the job search. It's about life. And all of these rules really apply to life, no matter what stage you're in. And certainly with what I do with retirement coaching, embrace creativity. And the second one, prioritize action, because anyone who has done coaching of people, there's only so much that you can do by thinking and talking about it. At some point, you need to start to act and try out things in small ways. So talk a little bit more about that second step.
The second step, action, obviously is always important, but I was really struck as I was interviewing people for the book, how many people said it, and frankly, it's gotten worse through the almost 2 years of COVID, who said, I know the things I need to do, but I just can't motivate. right now, right? It's a really tough time. I think Adam Grant used the word languishing, which I think is so descriptive. And what I find is people would say, well, I can't apply for jobs. I can't meet people. It's like, well, what can you do? What is the absolute smallest action you could take? And I'm a big fan of Carol Dweck's work on mindset. Some of you have probably read her book, Mindset. She does work out of Stanford University. Growth mindset essentially says, what can you do? What is the absolute smallest step you can take? So maybe you don't have the energy or the wherewithal to apply for a job. Could you edit one bullet point on your resume? Could you text one friend, right, to talk? What are the steps that you can take? And they really build on themselves. You may know the work of Dory Clark, who wrote a book called The Long Game, which I really admire. And one of the things she talks about is we tend to overestimate what we can do in a day, but underestimate what we can do in a week or a month or a year. Those small steps really add up. And I try to keep that in mind with any goals I have. And people always ask, how do you write books? And it's just one word at a time, right? It's not magic. It's getting little bits done every day. And I think a lot of people are worried that if they can't take a huge action, that they shouldn't do anything. So even small steps make a big difference.
Yeah, and we all have experienced that sensation of once you start to take those small steps, then suddenly, that's when serendipity happens. That's you have that one conversation that leads to a lead to a new job or a new opportunity that you didn't expect to have. So the third step, and I think this is probably, they're all wonderful and relevant, but the idea of control what you can. Haven't we all learned that in spades over the last 2 years?
Nancy, you know me well enough, and all of us in Fairfield County, born and bred, some of us are a little bit control freakish. I used to call myself a control freak, and a coach of mine said, that's a really negative term. You should call yourself a control enthusiast. So my new phrase for all of us who are type A, Nancy, maybe you resonate, we are control enthusiasts. And the hardest thing about this for me, there's so many people who've had, such a hard time, but the lack of control. We cannot control the variance. We cannot control the laws. I've had events cancel and start and so on, and there's just nothing you can do about it. And so this entire pandemic has been a huge exercise in controlling what we can. So what does that mean? Because it can be very amorphous. There is a meme on the internet that I've also seen as a poster in a lot of college and university career centers. And it's called 10 Things That Require Zero Talent. And it's things like being on time, having a good work ethic, having good energy, strong, powerful body language. Those little things actually make a tremendous difference in the world. And I would also say to those of us who have experience with imposter syndrome, right? I don't belong here, I'm not good enough. What I often say, particularly to young professionals, is when you're having those emotions of lack of control or failure or imposter syndrome, triple down on that list of things that theoretically require zero talent. Because if you're the one who's on time, if you're the one who follows the directions, if you're the one who's smiling when you log into a job interview, that matters. And I've interviewed so many recruiters, particularly about the really icky, uncomfortable environment of a job fair, which is now even worse with virtual job fairs. And I always say, how does someone stand out in a 60-second interaction with a recruiter in one of those very fake environments? And what they always say is a smile and eye contact. It's the absolute basics that so many people drop the ball on. So when I'm having a really bad day, I sort of think, what is the easiest win that I can control right now? And often it's like, I'm going to log into that Zoom a minute early so that I'm prepared and ready to go when it starts. And that's going to give me that extra push. So again, small changes that can make a really big difference.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with that one more. In my work with Next Avenue, I hear a lot from job seekers. And like you, I hear from people who are just, horribly frustrated with their job searches. And yet when I ask them some pretty questions about taking some pretty basic steps, did you send the thank you note? And they say, oh, well, everybody does that. I don't really need to do that. And it's like, yeah, you do need to do that, because guess what? You're right that you think everyone does it, but there are a lot of people who just fall down on the job. And putting together a really good thank you note, I can tell you, I used to be in corporate HR. It can make a difference. And so, couldn't agree with you more that just focusing in on those small, winnable, no talent steps is just so important to do. Going along with that, the fourth step is to know your non-negotiables. And again, I think we're all struggling with this right now. I was having a conversation with someone the other day about, what's your risk level? We're all trying to figure that out right now around COVID and going to events. And, we're all negotiating our non-negotiables in that sphere, but also clearly you need to do that in the job search.
That's such a good analogy. And I know it changes all the time, which I think is, again, another aspect of this environment that is so challenging. There are a lot of people who are job hunting. Maybe you're an older job seeker, maybe you've been out of the workforce for a while, you start a business. There can be red flags, and that's very real. And sometimes you are going to have to compromise to land a job or get what you want, but you never have to compromise on everything. And so I think it's really important, no matter who you are, what your situation, to decide what will you absolutely not compromise on. So for example, maybe it's salary. I have to make a certain amount to meet my monthly expenses. Maybe it is working from home. I will not go into an office anymore. This is my bottom line. Maybe it's mission. I will only work for a company where I agree with their mission. Maybe it is flexibility. Maybe it's benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you're clear on that, you're able to bend in other areas, and I think make the best of a situation that might be imperfect. So for example, I spoke with a woman who was a December 2020 graduate. She had a marketing degree, graduated directly into the pandemic in December 2020. And she needed money. She had student loans to pay back. She had no other family or external support. And she said, I needed to pay my rent and start paying my student loans. And at the time, the job market was tanking and she couldn't find anything in marketing. And she took the only job available, which was at a grocery store checkout. That was not her dream job, but she was able to get enough hours at this particular grocery store to earn enough to pay her rent and cover her expenses. And what she said was, I decided if I could fulfill that critical need, I would negotiate on everything else. And so what she did was she went in with a better attitude. She didn't say, ugh, but why am I, I went to college and I'm, checking out at the grocery store. She said, I'm going to turn this into an opportunity because I'm getting my needs fulfilled. So she chit-chatted with everybody she checked out and said, I'm looking for a job. Do you know anybody? She talked to the grocery store owner about helping with some of the marketing of the grocery store and some of the ad campaigns and so on and so forth. And within 6 months, she was able to leverage that into a different opportunity because she had her needs met. So I think when we're really clear on that top priority, it's really valuable. And one of the things for those who are not job hunting, who are simply recalculating in other areas of your life, one of the best little exercises, I think, on non-negotiables, there's something that Erica Keswin, who's an author, writes a lot about rituals in the workplace. I'm sure some of you know her work. And she said, take a look at your calendar in a given week and decide what is my top priority in life. Maybe it's my family, maybe it's my health, maybe it's my career. And look and see on your calendar, does my calendar reflect that top priority? So I was speaking to a CEO who said, I always say my family is the most important, but basically on my calendar, I'm giving them about 20 minutes a week. So it's a really good exercise to check, are you actually living what you say is your non-negotiable value?
Yeah, love that. And I was smiling to myself as you were talking about that young woman, because it reminded me of my daughter and 5 of her friends from Greenwich High School who graduated college in 2009. And if you remember what the job market was like then, it was just horrific. And so she had these friends who had all graduated from wonderful schools. None of them had jobs. And so what they did was they together formed a sort of informal company that they called Grads for Hire. And they came up with a little logo that said, let our tassels relieve you of your hassles. Okay. And they volunteered to, they were willing to pull weeds in people's gardens. They were willing to teach people how to use their computers, help out at birthday parties, whatever. And for each job that they got, they gave back an hour in community service. Well, this was a made for media story. Of course, the Greenwich Times picked it up, in a nanosecond. And the PS to the story is that within a month, all 5 of those young women had found jobs. And because they talked with the people, and as they were pulling weeds, people said to them, so what are you really looking for? And one thing led to another. And so that brings me to your 5th point, which is to ask for help, which is a really hard thing for a lot of us to do.
It is such a hard thing, but none of us are doing this alone, and people really want to help each other. One of the kind of most beautiful, heartwarming things I saw was that right at the height of COVID in March and April of 2020, Google announced that one of the top searches in Google was just the simple phrase, how can I help? People were just generically saying, how can I help? They want to help. And somehow, I would say, hey, Nancy, I love your sweater. Where did you get it? Or, who does your hair? We would ask them all that. But when it comes to our careers, we get kind of nervous or shy about it. And I really encourage people to talk to anyone and everyone they know about what they're looking for. People really want to help. On the flip side, I think another way to get out of that languishing, whether you're job hunting or just kind of want to re-energize, is when you're not sure what to do, go and help somebody else. And one of the things that I always remember, I was a spokesperson for LinkedIn for 6 years. I went around and taught people how to use LinkedIn. And Reid Hoffman, who was one of the founders of LinkedIn, he always said, I think people use LinkedIn wrong. He said, most people go into LinkedIn and say, what can I get from my network? And he said, he goes in and says, who can I support in my network? What can I give? So if you're introverted, if networking makes you uncomfortable, if you don't know what to do for yourself, go and help somebody else. And I think that's exactly what your daughter and her friends did.
Yeah. No, I think that's such wise advice. So now what I'd like to do is let's just shift gears a little bit and talk about the mental health toll of this pandemic. Here we are, it's 2022. We're coming onto March, which will mark the 2-year anniversary since all of this began. And even for people that are in relatively good situations, it's just been a really tough time. And, for people who are balancing job searches and families and health issues, it has been excruciatingly difficult. So what words of advice do you have, particularly for job seekers, as to how do you get up each morning and approach things with a positive mindset?
I'm so glad you brought this up. I think it is going to be the issue of 2022 and beyond for every demographic, as you mentioned, for so many different reasons. I personally am someone who has struggled with anxiety for most of my life. I take medication. I've had therapy for panic attacks and overthinking, et cetera, that control enthusiasm can get out of control. And I never, ever talked about it, ever. Some of it was shame, some of it was just, it didn't seem relevant. And for the first time during COVID, during my workshops and in the book, I have written and spoken about how I have managed my anxiety and mental health. And in fact, the first chapter of Recalculating is all about mindset and mental health. And if you don't have that, you can't do a recalculation. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive of people saying, thank you for admitting that. Thank you for sharing that. Now I can too. And I'm almost embarrassed that I never addressed it before because it's such a part of my life and such a part of what I think everyone has to think about, that maybe in some ways the pandemic has made it more okay to talk about these kind of things publicly. And I think that companies even are now realizing that if their employees don't have, their mental health taken care of, they're not going to be able to perform at work. So I think this idea of burnout is sort of the way that we are talking about it, and well-being. But if you need help, seek help. If you can find people to talk to, find a group to talk to. Just one small piece, obviously seek professional help if you need it. But I worked with a group of people who had been laid off from a really big retail company during the pandemic. And they started just a little text message chain to just check in on each other and say, how are you doing? How are you holding up? Hey, I saw this job for you. And that was such a strong way to stay connected to other people. There are so many resources able to do that, but I think just not letting loneliness take over is really, really important. And everyone deals with mental health in a different way. I think we've over-indexed on meditating and people saying like, we should all download a meditation app, and that's great. But if that doesn't work for you, find what does, and don't worry if it's not what everybody tells you it should be, because for some people it's video games or cooking or walking your dog. It doesn't have to be meditating, but mental health is absolutely critical. I'm so glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that about meditating, because I am one of these people who just sits there and goes, I start doing the grocery list, who I forgot to call, and I am a meditation flunky, and then I feel worse about things after I attempt to do that. So, well, I think one of the, in some ways, one of the positive outcomes of the pandemic for job seekers has been, we've all been talking and reading about the Great Resignation. And we see literally millions of people who are leaving their jobs. And clearly some of this is working parents who have no alternatives. Some of it, a significant portion of it is actually boomers who, housing market improved, stock market soared. They suddenly found themselves in a position financially where they could afford to retire a little bit earlier. That has been a big chunk of it. But part of it has just been people who say, you know what, this has caused me to rethink sort of my career and my life, and I'm looking to go in a different direction. And part of it is just opportunity knocking, that right now the unemployment rate is very low. I just read something that said by the end of 2022, some economists are predicting a 3.8% unemployment rate, which is historically extraordinarily low. So in many ways, it's a great time to shift gears and to look for something new. So 2 questions in regards to that. The first is, can you talk to how somebody who's thinking about making a change might want to approach the whole area of salary negotiation, because typically people are looking to improve when it comes to salary and total benefits package?
So I do want to parse the numbers on the Great Resignation. Yes, quit rates are higher than they've ever been. More people are changing jobs, but a lot of it is regional and a lot of it is industry specific. So if you look at the numbers in New York City, for example, I know a lot of people in the city who are struggling to find a job because the job offerings are much lower than they were pre-pandemic. We've still lost quite a lot of jobs, particularly in retail and hospitality and entertainment, which are such a huge part of the New York economy. So it's not everywhere, right? If you're in tech, you're probably in good shape. And there's certain industries that are hiring more than others. So if you feel left out of that sort of amazing economy, I do want to say that, it can be very, very valid depending on where you are and what you're looking for. When it comes to salary, I'm also a little bit cautious on the idea that it's always better to jump. Right? I think a lot of people can actually do quite well if you're happy enough in your job to be the one who stays and to be the one who says, hey, I'm loyal, I stuck around, other people are leaving, and I think there's an opportunity to say, here's what I'm contributing. And so if you are happy enough in your job, sort of try to resist that grass is always greener, fear of missing out factor that I think a lot of people are leaving. And I've already seen, I predicted this, I've already seen people boomeranging back to the companies they left saying the grass wasn't greener and now I want to come back. So if you're happy, this is a really good opportunity to talk about why you should be compensated more, because people have left, because you have kept things consistent in a difficult time. But the biggest tip on salary negotiation, there are 2. One is you have got to do your research. People pull numbers out of thin air. People say, well, I think I should go up 10% because the economy is good. You have to do some research, whether it is talking to people, which is really uncomfortable, but the law just changed in New York City, for instance, that job postings have to say a salary range. I belong to a listserv of women in business, and we have a rule that if you post a job, you have to post the salary range. So I think particularly it's helpful for women or anyone from an underrepresented group to try to ask those questions. Another place to find out what a reasonable range or increase would be is a lot of people don't realize no matter how long ago you graduated, you can go back to your college or university career center. You can even reach out to one in your community of all the great universities that are in Connecticut and in the tri-state area and have those conversations. And it really is about range and knowing, here's what I'm thinking, is that realistic? The second tip, particularly if you're staying, is I think a lot of people make the mistake of saying, I deserve more because the economy is good, or I deserve more because I'm working hard, or the company is doing well. Nobody cares about that. What they care about is what you're contributing. So always remember to put the conversation not in terms of what you want or what you deserve, but about the value you're bringing to the company. I'm able to move the bottom line this much. My contributions are making this difference or saving us this much money. So I think flipping the script and remembering it's not about you, it's about what you're doing for the organization is really powerful. So number one, research. Number two, what's in it for them to compensate you more.
Yeah, both great points. And I think also to that, I would add that Connecticut recently passed legislation that the employer can no longer ask what you are currently earning. Mm-hmm. And that's a very important thing for people to know, because you can now go in, and if you've done your research, you can ask for something that is significantly more than what you were earning before, because they are not legally allowed to ask that question anymore. And also in regards to the research, I was just reading an article the other day that talked about, a job search hack that people can do is, I believe in the state of Colorado, they have now made it a state law that salaries have to be transparent. And so you can take a look at job listings in Colorado to get a sense of what are companies paying. I mean, this is always, you always have to massage those numbers, because nothing is ever going to line up with your level of experience and your geographic region perfectly, but certainly it can give you a good range to begin to negotiate from. So
can I give two more tips on salary, Nancy?
Sure.
These are from my own big mistakes. Number one, if you give a range, do not assume they're going to go for the middle. I thought, well, if I say 50 to 70 because I want 60, they're going to offer 60. No. If you say 50 to 70, they're going to offer you 50. That's number one. Number two, practice saying the number. So often people go in and they're dreading that question, right? It's a question you know. Practice saying it over and over and over so your voice doesn't crack and you don't get nervous and kind of hold back. Practice saying, I would like to request a salary of $50,000 to $60,000 so that you are comfortable saying it and feel confident. I think a lot of people miss out on some of those basics because it's always a nerve-wracking question.
Yeah, that is really so true. And I think also for the women who are listening in, unfortunately, research has shown that women are just woefully behind men in sort of going for higher salaries and just being comfortable asking for higher salaries. And so I think to practice really can help make a difference. So the second question having to do with looking for a new opportunity is this question of assessing fit, because you just mentioned that you have seen people who thought that they were going where the grass was greener, and indeed it was not. So what are, it used to be back in the good old days when you would go to an office, you could sort of get a real sense of culture and environment just from the vibe in the air and from walking around. It's not so easy to do on a virtual basis, but it still is something that you want to spend some time assessing. So what tips do you have for that?
I agree. It can be really challenging if you are not able to go in physically and get the vibe of a place. So a couple of things, I hesitate to talk about things like Glassdoor, because a lot of times it's the disgruntled people who post on websites. It's a website where people kind of review their companies, but maybe take a peek. If the company has retail locations, maybe it's a bank or retail store, go in, check them out, go on their website and see how you feel about it. Follow that organization on social media and see if you like the vibe of what they post about. LinkedIn is a fantastic place to see if you know anybody who knows anybody who works at that company. And do not be shy about saying, hey, Nancy, I saw that your friend John works at IBM. I'm thinking of applying for a job there. Would you feel comfortable making an introduction? I just want to ask a few questions. Most people are very, very happy to do that. The formal name is informational interview, but I think it's just chatting about a company. Again, I would absolutely not hesitate to get in touch with your alma mater, whatever that is, even if you graduated 40 years ago. to say, I'm thinking about this company. Do we have any alums who work there? LinkedIn can tell you that, but usually career services might say, oh, I remember somebody who worked there and this is what they said. Take it with a huge grain of salt, what anybody else says, because it's their personal experience. But the final piece is really pay attention to your entire interaction with the company while you are applying. Did their process seem to be easy to go through? Did you get a generic response message, or did a human being reach out to you? Did they reschedule with you 15 times? Did they seem happy to see you? Who did you meet in the process? Really trust your gut of how you experience that particular process, because I think that's going to inform you. I remember when I was applying to colleges, whoever answered the phone when I had to call for the application in the old days, I would kind of jot down, the vibe I felt from them, because it all kind of fits together. But the absolute best research you can possibly do is a human being who works for that company and can answer some of your questions. But some of it's a gamble. I mean, a lot of people, go to a company because they had a really good feeling about a particular boss, and that boss leaves, right? Or your division gets closed. So I also kind of want to say there are no perfect opportunities. I've actually tried to really step away from words like dream job or dream employer, because nothing is perfect. You have to decide on that non-negotiable, what is most important to you, and find out as much as you can about that particular element of the job, knowing that it's not going to be perfect, and kind of moderate your expectations accordingly. If it's 80% great, that's a pretty good thing. Nothing is really 100% perfect.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And I would also add to that, for people that are older job seekers, I think it's especially important to do some of the things that you just mentioned, to use your network to get a sense of how does this company treat their older workers. When you look at the people that they feature on their website, is everybody 30? If you look at the words that they're using in the job description, are they looking for, digital natives or high levels of enthusiasm? I mean, all of these are code words for, we are looking for really young people here. And so you have to do a lot of sleuthing, I think, ahead of time. But to your point, there's only so much that you can do ahead, because, as your book says, companies are recalculating all the time too. And so you can go in, I think we've all had that experience. If you get hired into a company and the first year or two, it's just the most wonderful place to work and you have a great boss. And then, things change. Your boss leaves, and it can really change the way that you feel about the environment. So lots of things to think about when you're evaluating jobs. So Lindsey, what are, as I said, your books are always so just chock full of tips and suggestions, but if you could tell us what your 3 favorite tips are from the book. I realize that's like asking, who's your favorite child, but take a stab at it.
I actually feel guilty when I call it like my unintended 4th book. It's like when people say their accidental 4th child, I always feel bad for that kid. Okay, so I wrote these down because I didn't want to forget. Final 3 takeaways. Number 1, mental health first. Not only because you're not going to be able to do your best in the job search if you are not taking care of your mental health, but it comes through. If you are unhappy, if you are stressed, if you are tired, that is going to come through in the job search. So number 1, mental health first. Number 2, small steps make the biggest difference. If you did one thing every day, texted a contact, reached out to your career services office, updated your LinkedIn headline, little steps every day are really the way to accomplish big goals. And the 3rd is relationships. As a career person, Nancy, I'm sure you have this, people always say, what's the best career advice you've ever received? And I was in Stamford, Connecticut at a Rotary Club meeting. I went on a Rotary scholarship to grad school. And this older Rotarian said, here's my best advice from my long life. Keep building your contacts, because everything comes through people. It's going to be a person that refers you, a person that hires you, people that you work with. So I'd rather you had 100 phone calls than applied to 100 jobs. I think tapping into the people who already know you and like you and want to support you is the most powerful thing you can do. So really thinking about your relationships as the best way to find your next opportunity would be my final tip.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think we have enough time that I could share this story at the end. And Lindsey, I don't even know if you're aware of this story, but Speaking of building your network, and I think one of the problems, again, that older job seekers often face is that their networks age out. And so it's always a good idea to network with people who are younger than you or people that are older than you, the intergenerational conversation. But it's especially important for older people. And so the story that I wanted to share is that Lindsey's mother, Jane Pollack, is someone who is a noted entrepreneur, and she is an artist, and she recently got into sort of a new business, creating these really beautiful pillows. And Jane decided that she wanted to photograph these pillows in really beautiful settings. Lindsey, do you know where I'm going with this story?
I sure do. I love this story.
Okay. So Jane went to the D&D building in Manhattan, which is the main design building in Manhattan. And she had a lead to get into a showroom there, and the lead did not pan out. And so, speaking of getting creative, what she did was she sort of looked around, and she happened to see this ad for one of the showrooms. And she thought, oh, that looks like the perfect setting for my pillows. And so she took a really gutsy step, and she walked into the showroom. And for those of you who have not been to the D&D building, you really shouldn't be, you shouldn't be doing
the
this,
rules,
really.
essentially, is what you're saying.
She was sort of bending the rules a little. It's really only open to designers and architects. But she decided, she went in, she goes into the showroom, and she says, you know, I just love your look here, and I have these pillows. And she pulls them out, and she said, would it be okay if I photograph some of my pillows against your furniture? And so this woman comes up to her and says, well, yeah, I guess it would be okay. And so she got to photograph the pillows in the showroom setting. And of course, Jane was very grateful, and she starts chatting with the young woman. And then she asks her what her name is, and the young woman hands her her card. And Jane looks at the card, and she says, Collamer, by any chance, are you related to Nancy Collamer? And my daughter, Danielle, at that point said, am I related to her? That's my mom. And so I just thought it was such a great example. So they texted me a picture of the two of them together with no other commentary. And of course, I looked at the photo and I thought, my goodness, what is this? And then what I did was I texted back the picture from the Greenwich Library site of me and you. And I said, how crazy is this? So, you know, the point being that if you're willing to get out of your comfort zone a little bit, wonderful things, serendipity happens.
Can I add to that, Nancy? Because I love that story, of course, but I know that there are some people who are probably thinking, well, I don't know anybody. I don't go to the D building. You know, I don't have that big a network. I know that's a real concern of a lot of people. You can create that serendipity, I think, by what I would call doing your homework, which is, you know, for example, if you want to work for a furniture company and there's one you really admire, you can read a lot about that company and follow the social media of somebody who works there and cold email them and say, I really admire you. And here's what I admire. And when you show that you've put in the work, people really appreciate that. Maybe it's going to a volunteer event. Maybe it's, I've mentioned your alma mater several times, or even an event like this, to be in the chat at a Greenwich Public Library event and see that someone is asking interesting questions and reach out to them and say, I saw that we were at the same event and you asked interesting questions. I'd love to hear about your job search. You don't have to know thousands of people or
Right.
sort of hope for these amazing moments, which are wonderful.
Well,
but
Lindsey,
I also don't
actually,
want to discourage people on that.
Yeah, and what I especially loved about that story was that my daughter did not know who your mom was. So she did not know that there was a connection there. And it was funny because when I spoke with her about it afterwards, I said to her, what, you know, how come you gave her permission to do that? Because she didn't know her. So at that point, she was a total stranger. And what she said to me was, she said, well, Mom, she said, I actually sort of felt a little sorry for her because I thought, you know, she's in this place, she probably got a lot of no's. And she said, she just seemed like a really nice person. And her pillows were beautiful. And I thought, okay, so she actually did that all for a complete and total stranger until she realized she was not a total stranger. So, it is interesting how sometimes life works in strange and mysterious ways.
I think they should be running this webinar then, not us.
Absolutely. So what I'd love to do now is, I do see we have some questions in the chat, and I'm going to turn it back to Michelle and we'll get into some Q&A.
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much. That was a great conversation. And I really love the way you were able to cover more of the nuances behind what the headlines are or what we take for granted. So I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. We have a couple of questions. The first one from Bob: how does one change their job search efforts in the current environment, i.e. the new world of work? Are employers willing to hire workers who will only work remotely?
I'll take it first, and then Nancy, I'm sure you have thoughts. It is tremendously different now to seek remote work because so many companies are looking for exactly that. So I saw some number that, the percentage of jobs listing remote opportunities went up something like 35% since the pandemic. So absolutely, if you want to be remote, consider including the word remote as a search term for any jobs that you want. There are also entire websites that are only for remote jobs. One that comes to mind is called Flex Jobs, F-L-E-X, flexjobs.com. So absolutely. I will say just one small caveat, Michelle, you talked about the nuance. Some companies, there are tax issues with hiring people in different states. So sometimes it's a little bit wonky of where you can look, but absolutely more than ever, making sure that you use remote as a search term. And frankly, I would probably err on the side of looking for remote opportunities rather than trying to convince someone to turn something remote, because there are so many opportunities right now.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is you do just want to be a little bit cautious as to, is this remote only during the pandemic? Are they hoping to turn this back into an in-person? Some companies have been very forthright about, we never expect to go back in the office. Other companies are clearly we're in a holding pattern, and once the pandemic eases, God willing, they will go back to either some sort of hybrid or in-person work arrangement. So you do want to screen for that.
Great, thanks so much for that. And we have another question from Chitra. Two questions. Hi, Chitra. Nice to see people we know. How do you pivot or find an alternative career path? And if job experience is in one country, but you are now in another country, how do we get over the obstacle of not having local experience? Oh, those are two tough ones. Well, especially the second one.
Great questions, but an opportunity to bring back my car metaphor. There was a really great study I found that talked about changing careers, and they actually talked about it in terms of changing lanes. And what they said was, people think that if you're going to change from one career to another, that you're starting over from scratch. And it kind of goes back to that idea I talked about at the beginning. And it's actually extremely rare from almost any job to any other job that there is not some crossover in those two lanes. So we often call them, essential skills or transferable skills. One example was I worked with a chef who lost his job during COVID and was really kind of tired of working in restaurants. And so he went to his college career center. He was based in Pennsylvania, and he took an assessment test, which is a really good way to answer that first question of what do I want to do? And the assessment test showed he had a huge aptitude for logistics, right? Ordering, logistics, planning, transportation, et cetera. And it made sense because he had ordered all of the ingredients for the restaurant, right? And planned the staffing of the restaurant. And even menu planning was a form of logistics. He took a 1-credit class at his alma mater, and he got a really great job in the Pennsylvania area, which was a strong market for logistics. Who would have thought chef logistics? But when you really dug into it, it made sense. And one of the things that you can do is literally Google, career change from kindergarten teacher, career change from marketing executive, and you can find millions of people who've kind of made the same pivot. So I think assessment tests and research are really important. I also think a lot of us in the back of our minds also have ideas of things we've always kind of wanted to try. And that's a really good place to start. And one of the things that I would recommend is to look up people who are doing the things you've always dreamt of doing and start to follow them on social media, whichever one you choose. I like LinkedIn because it's professional, but maybe if you're more in a design career or something creative, it might be elsewhere. But start to look. We've never had so much ability to see what other people do. So if I'm really interested in becoming a pillow designer like my mom did, let me follow 10 pillow designers and see where did they go to school? What classes did they take? What jobs did they have? What skills do they list that I have too? And you can really use that to your advantage. On the global issue, I think there's never been a better time to say that you have global experience. I wouldn't see that as holding you back at all. But what I would say is anything that makes you different, Chitra, maybe it's being out of the workplace, having experience in another country, being younger, being older, I would consciously turn that into a selling point. I would say, I think I'm the best candidate for this job because I can bring you experience from another country. And that's going to, empower me to help our team much more than somebody who had domestic experience. I was really struck when I interviewed people for Recalculating, where they have the same background. Maybe it's being in from another country. And one person would say, I'm never going to get another job because I have no local experience. And the other person with the same resume would say, I'm going to be the first person they want to hire because I come with global experience, and that will add something to the team. So I think your approach to how you sell it is going to really help you. But Nancy, I'll stop talking. I'm sure you have a lot to add.
So I would agree with everything you said. The only thing I would add to it is just really two suggestions, is to consider doing some local volunteering or even taking a local class, or actually a third suggestion, which would be to join some sort of local networking groups, because I think the more that you can do locally, it will add that local flavor to all of that wonderful global experience that you bring them. And I think that helps to complete the circle for you.
Can I add one more thing? I love what you said about taking classes. It is so easy now on LinkedIn or Udemy or Coursera, any of these places. You can take a 1-hour webinar and add to your LinkedIn profile that you now have taken a course on something like logistics that doesn't appear in your resume. So it's really easy to indicate to people how serious you are about making a change by taking credit. For example, I didn't have any diversity, equity, inclusion experience, which I think is really important for a career coach to have now. So I took a free course from the University of South Florida. It was a 6-hour course, and now I have a credential in that to show not just that I learned the content, but that I'm serious about saying that that's something that's important to me. So taking classes is a really great suggestion.
Thank you, ladies. All right, another one is, we'll just have time for a couple more. I'm going to combine this one. Since all companies can Google people and find out their age, are people over 65 at a disadvantage for finding a job, or do some people prefer seasoned people? And then just to tag this one on, is looking for a teaching job at 65 a viable option? That's 2 over 65 questions.
Nancy, why don't you start on
All
that?
right,
That's your expertise.
So what I would say to that is that there are absolutely employers who welcome people who bring maturity and stability and lots of experience to the table. And that is what age can do for you. At the same time, that's what you want to emphasize to the employer. It's not that you are over 65 and you bring those things. It's that, let me talk about the expertise that I bring, give some proactive examples of that would illustrate your stability, your depth of expertise to the employer, because that is what's important. And along with that, I would say that there are certain industries that are notorious for being where ageism, is rampant. Entertainment, sports. I mean, I could sort of list, tech does not have a great reputation in that area. But if you go to things like healthcare, and yes, teaching, and again, teaching can be challenging for a variety of reasons, I think, for people over 65. But what I would say is, again, tap into your network locally and find out what the local flavor is around that issue. But healthcare, being an entrepreneur, doing freelancing, all of that can be great for people that are over 65. So Lindsey, what would you add to that?
I would add go where people want you. I think the AARP job board is a fantastic resource for companies that are specifically open to older candidates. And by the way, ageism, as Nancy said, it's real, but it's something we can't control, whether somebody is going to be ageist. The other thing I'm going to say is I interviewed a lot of recruiters about ageism, and they admit that it happens, but they said, don't get in your own way. What you can control is not logging into the webinar and saying, oh, Michelle, I'm old enough to be your mother, right? Don't say immediately, I know I'm probably too old for this job, or I know you probably think I'm too old for this job. I would take your graduation year off of your resume and LinkedIn profile. Yeah, people can Google you, but you don't have to say it. Don't make the first sentence of your bio based on my 47 years of experience, right? Talk about the things that Nancy mentioned. It's not fair that that might be held against you, but you don't have to lead with your age.
That's
Yeah.
a great answer, both of you.
And don't assume that anyone is really going to be actively Googling your age.
Right.
You know, I think, again, as Lindsey said, if you lead with all of the positive qualities, the reasons why people like older workers, and obviously, I mean, the big one is to tap into your network, people who've worked with you before, people who can refer you into jobs. That's going to be the best way to find a great new opportunity.
Okay, and this will be our final question, ladies, because I've kept you long enough, but from Luke, how should one handle an interview in which the first or a very early question is, what salary do you want? This is particularly tricky for those of us who have very high comp expectations and a career with a potentially very broad range depending on firm and level.
I would go back to know your non-negotiables, which is if there is a salary that you want, stick to that and be honest about what you're looking for, but do your homework in advance to know if that is going to be a reasonable request, so that you're not saying, I would like $250,000. You would say, well, I know that the range for somebody with my experience in this type of role tends to be 250 to 300. And I believe I should be at the top of that range because I bring X, Y, and Z to the table. So I think it has to be a combination of what you want and having done your homework in order to prove that what you want is reasonable for the opportunity. And frankly, if they say, I'm sorry, we were offering 75,000 for that, that's just not the right opportunity, and be willing to walk away. So if that's your non-negotiable, I say stick to it with backup research.
Yeah, and to that I would add, the other thing is, if possible, you know, if it's the first question out of the gate, to say to them, I will absolutely be happy to answer that, but first I would love to learn a bit more about the job so I can give you a more accurate answer. Let's talk about that, and then would it be okay if we circle back to that later?
Salary as a first question feels like a red flag to me, doesn't it? To you, Nancy?
You want to find out exactly what are they looking for before you throw out that number. So I would try to avoid that. That's a really uncomfortable situation.
Well, thank you, ladies. I want to let you know that both Nancy and Lindsey's books are available at the library for checkout. So please visit the library soon. And I'll get back to the people who emailed me their contact information about how they can get their copy of Recalculating. Thank you so much. I look forward to putting this up on our website as soon as we can get it edited. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to everyone for attending.